The entrance was barely visible. Vines had grown over it, thick tropical foliage obscuring what had once been a deliberate opening carved into limestone. Itoman, Southern Okinawa, June 22, 2022. Matthew Small, an unexploded ordnance quality assurance representative with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, knelt at the cave mouth and shined his flashlight into the darkness. Behind him, volunteers from Kuentai-USA, a nonprofit dedicated to recovering remains of American servicemen, prepared their equipment. They were about to enter a cave that had been sealed for 77 years. Inside, they believed, were the remains of Private First Class John B. Quinn, Jr., a Marine from Brooklyn who had disappeared on June 29, 1945, just 7 days after the Battle of Okinawa officially ended. Quinn had entered this cave with another Marine named John Hartman to search for souvenirs. Shots rang out. The Japanese soldiers inside, refusing to surrender, had ambushed them. Quinn's buddy detonated a satchel charge to seal the entrance, trapping everyone inside, Americans and Japanese alike. The cave became a tomb. Now, in June 2022, searchers were finally going to excavate it. They dug through collapsed ceiling material, sifting dirt and clay that had compacted over decades. 1 meter below what had been the cave floor, they found ceramic tiles, traditional red Okinawan roof tiles repurposed as flooring, hidden from sight for nearly 8 decades. Then they found bones. Human bones, teeth, American coins, vials of morphine, hand grenades, Japanese military rice bowls, Japanese hanko, personal name stamps, and more bones. This is not a story about one cave sealed for exactly 80 years. Multiple caves across Okinawa were sealed, collapsed, or abandoned during the Battle of Okinawa in 1945, and many remained undiscovered for decades. This is the story of what American Marines found when they cleared caves during the battle, and what volunteers, archaeologists, and recovery teams have found in the decades since. It's about the cave warfare that made Okinawa the bloodiest battle of the Pacific War. It's about the Japanese defensive strategy that turned an entire island into a fortress. It's about the civilians who hid in caves and died by the thousands. And it's about the ongoing effort to recover remains and bring closure to families. 80 years after the fighting ended. The title suggests one cave sealed for 80 years. The reality is more complex and tragic. Hundreds of caves, thousands of dead, and discoveries still being made today. If you're enjoying this deep dive into history, please subscribe and let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from today. The Battle of Okinawa began on April 1st, 1945, Easter Sunday, and lasted 82 days until June 22nd. It was the largest amphibious assault in the Pacific War. The United States assembled a fleet of 1,500 ships, the largest naval armada in history at that point. More than 183,000 American soldiers and Marines came ashore on Okinawa's beaches. Their mission was to capture the island as a staging base for the planned invasion of mainland Japan, only 350 miles to the north. Okinawa was the last obstacle before the Japanese home islands. The Japanese knew it. They had spent months preparing defenses. Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima commanded the Japanese 32nd Army. Approximately 77,000 troops, plus 20,000 Okinawan conscripts organized into the Beitai-Tai, a local defense militia. Ushijima's chief of staff, Lieutenant General Isamu Cho, and his operations officer, Colonel Hiromichi Yahara, devised a defensive strategy based on lessons learned from earlier battles at Iwo Jima and Peleliu. They would not defend the beaches. They would not launch banzai charges. Instead, they would turn Okinawa's rugged terrain into a killing ground using caves and tunnels as the foundation of their defense. Okinawa's geology made this possible. The island is limestone, formed from ancient coral reefs. Limestone erodes easily, creating natural caves, called gama in Okinawan language. Over millions of years, water had carved thousands of caves into Okinawa's hills and ridges. Some were small, just a few meters deep. Others were massive complexes extending hundreds of meters underground with multiple chambers and levels. The Japanese had been fortifying Okinawa since late 1944. Construction units, including tens of thousands of Okinawan laborers, Korean forced laborers, and Japanese military engineers, expanded natural caves and dug new tunnels. They created underground command posts, hospitals, barracks, ammunition depots, and fighting positions. The caves were interconnected by tunnels, allowing troops to move between positions without being seen. Gun ports were carved at multiple levels, providing overlapping fields of fire. Artillery pieces were positioned in caves, fired, then moved to different positions before American counter-battery fire could respond. The defenses concentrated in southern Okinawa, particularly around a series of ridgelines. The Machinato Line, Kakazu Ridge, Uresomura Escarpment. The Shuri Line, centered on the ancient Shuri Castle. Sugar Loaf Hill, Kanishi Ridge. Each ridgeline had dozens or hundreds of caves, all mutually supporting, all packed with Japanese defenders determined to exact maximum American casualties. The 32nd Army's strategy was attrition. They couldn't defeat the American invasion, but they could make it so costly that American leaders would reconsider invading Japan itself. If Okinawa could demonstrate that every Japanese home island would require months of brutal fighting and tens of thousands of American casualties, perhaps the Americans would negotiate a conditional surrender instead of demanding unconditional surrender. It was a strategy of sacrifice. The Japanese defenders knew they would die. The question was how many Americans they could kill first. When the Americans landed on April 1st, they met minimal resistance on the beaches. The Marines pushed north, encountering light opposition and securing northern Okinawa by April 18th. But in the south, where the Army divisions advanced, the fighting became savage almost immediately. The American troops encountered the first major defensive line, the Machinato Line, on April 9th. They found ridges honeycombed with caves, hidden guns that would fire from one opening, then cease fire before American artillery could respond, then resume fire from a different opening. Infiltration tactics where Japanese soldiers emerged from caves at night to attack American positions, then disappeared back underground before dawn. Reverse slope defenses where the Japanese positioned their strongest defenses on the backside of ridges, invisible to American artillery observers. The Americans had superior firepower, naval gunfire from battleships and cruisers offshore, artillery by the hundreds of tubes, close air support from carrier aircraft, tanks, flamethrowers. But firepower couldn't destroy enemies hiding in caves deep underground. Each cave had to be cleared individually. Each ridge had to be taken by infantry assault, often across open ground, under fire from multiple concealed positions. The casualty rates were horrific. In the 96th Infantry Division, one rifle company lost 125 men killed or wounded in a single day attacking Kakazu Ridge. The company started the day with 180 men. Another company in the same division lost every officer, all killed or wounded. Replacements arrived, were sent into combat, and became casualties within hours. Some men lasted less than a day on the front line. The Marines faced similar horrors in their sector. The 1st Marine Division attacked Dakeshi Ridge and Wana Ridge repeatedly throughout May, taking massive casualties each time. One Marine company lost 150 men in 3 days. The fighting was close quarters, often hand-to-hand inside caves. Grenades, bayonets, entrenching tools used as weapons. Men shot at point-blank range. Bodies piling up in narrow tunnels. Cave warfare required specialized tactics. The standard method was combined arms. Artillery and naval gunfire would pound a suspected cave entrance. Tanks would maneuver close and fire high-explosive shells directly into openings. Flamethrower teams, typically one man carrying the M2-2 flamethrower and 2 riflemen protecting him, would advance under covering fire and spray burning fuel into cave mouths. The M2-2 flamethrower carried 4.7 gallons of napalm fuel mixture under pressure. It could shoot a stream of fire approximately 50 yards and burn for about 10 seconds of continuous fire. When napalm entered a cave, it consumed all oxygen, suffocating anyone inside who wasn't burned to death. The process was methodical but dangerous. A typical cave-clearing operation involved multiple steps. First, reconnaissance. Scouts would identify suspected cave positions by looking for gun ports, disturbed earth, ventilation holes, or tracks leading to concealed entrances. Second, isolation. Infantry would maneuver to surround the cave position, preventing escape or reinforcement. Third, reduction. This is where the killing happened. Artillery forward observers would call for fire missions. Shells would slam into the hillside around the cave entrance. The goal wasn't to penetrate the cave. Artillery couldn't do that, but to suppress defensive fire and create smoke and dust to obscure American movements. Then tanks would advance. M4 Sherman tanks mounting 75mm guns or M4A3E8 Shermans with 76mm high-velocity guns would approach to within 50 or 100 yards and fire directly into cave openings. High-explosive shells exploding inside caves created devastating overpressure that could kill everyone in the first chamber. But Japanese defenders learned to build internal walls, baffles, and right-angle turns in tunnels to protect against direct fire and overpressure. One well-designed cave system could absorb dozens of tank rounds without being neutralized. Next came the infantry assault. Rifle squads would provide suppressive fire on the cave entrance while the assault team moved forward. The assault team typically consisted of one flamethrower operator, 2 riflemen for protection, and an explosives man carrying satchel charges or pole charges. The rifleman moved first, firing into the cave entrance to suppress any defenders. The flamethrower operator followed, crouching low, approaching to within 20 or 30 yards. Then he would trigger the weapon. A jet of burning napalm, a mixture of gasoline and a thickening agent that made it stick to surfaces and burn intensely, would spray into the cave mouth. The stream arced through the air. Liquid fire that splashed against cave walls, pooled on floors, and spread into side chambers. Temperature inside the cave spiked to over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit in the immediate flame zone. Anyone caught in direct flame died instantly, skin and clothing igniting, flesh burning. Anyone in adjacent chambers who avoided direct flame often died from oxygen deprivation. Fire consumes oxygen. A sustained flamethrower burst in an enclosed space would remove all breathable air within seconds. Defenders suffocated, gasping, unable to breathe, dying in darkness as their lungs filled with superheated toxic smoke. Flamethrower operators had one of the most dangerous jobs in the infantry. They carried a weapon that marked them as high-priority targets. Japanese soldiers knew that if they killed the flamethrower operator, the assault would stall. Snipers specifically targeted men carrying flamethrowers, and the weapon itself was dangerous. If a bullet punctured the fuel tanks or igniter system, the operator could be engulfed in flames. Many flamethrower operators died burning from their own weapons. After the flamethrower did its work, the explosives man advanced. He carried satchel charges, canvas bags containing 20 pounds or more of TNT or composition explosives. He would place the charge at the cave entrance or throw it inside, then retreat to a safe distance. The charge detonated, collapsing part of the cave entrance or killing anyone who survived the flamethrower. Some assault teams used pole charges, explosives attached to long wooden poles. The operator would extend the pole into the cave, push the charge deep inside, then pull the pole out and detonate the charge. This allowed placement of explosives further into cave systems without entering. After explosives, engineers would sometimes bulldoze the entrance shut, pushing tons of dirt and rock over the opening to seal it permanently. Anyone still alive inside was entombed. They would die from suffocation, starvation, or thirst over the following days. This sounds barbaric, and it was. But the alternative, sending infantry into caves to clear them room by room in close-quarters combat, resulted in even higher American casualties. The Japanese defenders were desperate, fighting from prepared positions with superior knowledge of the terrain. Every American soldier who entered a contested cave faced ambush from multiple directions in darkness. Some caves were too large or complex to clear with flamethrowers and explosives. These required direct assault by infantry. This was the most dangerous work. A typical assault would begin with grenades. Soldiers would throw fragmentation grenades into the cave entrance, hoping to kill or wound defenders in the first chamber. Then they would enter weapons ready. Visibility was near zero. Flashlights made soldiers targets, so they fought in darkness or by muzzle flash. The Japanese defenders knew every corner, every turn, every hiding place. They would wait in side chambers or behind bends and tunnels, then open fire at point-blank range when Americans advanced. The result was savage close-quarters combat, shooting at shadows, bayonet charges in darkness, men grappling hand-to-hand using knives, rifle butts, entrenching tools as weapons. The confined space amplified every sound. Gunfire was deafening. Screams echoed. The smell was overwhelming: cordite, blood, human waste, decomposing bodies. Some soldiers described entering caves as descending into hell. The darkness, the certainty of ambush, the knowledge that the enemy was waiting somewhere ahead, invisible, ready to kill. Veterans' accounts described the terror. One Marine recalled entering a cave on Kanishi Ridge. You couldn't see anything. You just pointed your rifle ahead and pulled the trigger, hoping you'd hit something before they hit you. Another soldier described a cave assault where his squad lost half its men in the first 30 seconds. We went in shooting. They opened up from 3 different positions. Half the guys went down before we even knew where the fire was coming from. A third veteran remembered finding a cave with multiple levels. We cleared the first level, thought we were done, then started taking fire from above. They had positions on a second level we didn't even know was there. The psychological impact of cave fighting was cumulative. After weeks of this work, men broke. Combat fatigue, now called PTSD, was epidemic among troops clearing caves. Some men refused to enter caves, freezing at entrances despite orders. Others became reckless, charging into caves without caution, seeking death. Still others became withdrawn, emotionless, mechanically following orders but psychologically absent. The casualty rate among assault troops was unsustainable. Companies would be rebuilt multiple times during the campaign. A rifle company with 180 men might suffer 150 casualties in a week, receive replacements, then suffer another 100 casualties the next week. Replacements, fresh from training, inexperienced in combat, often died within hours or days of joining their units. Experienced veterans tried to teach new men how to survive, but there was no safe way to learn cave warfare. You survived or you didn't. Some soldiers developed personal techniques. One Marine described always throwing grenades around corners before advancing. I threw grenades at everything. Every corner, every shadow, every suspicious spot. I probably wasted 100 grenades for every Jap I killed, but it kept me alive. Another soldier carried a pistol instead of a rifle inside caves. Rifles too long in close quarters. Pistol was better. You could point and shoot faster. Veterans learned to identify cave entrances by smell. Decomposing bodies had a distinctive odor. Occupied caves smelled of human waste, cooking, unwashed bodies. Experienced troops could smell a cave from 50 yards and know whether it was occupied or abandoned. The Japanese defenders faced their own horrors. Trapped underground, with no hope of relief or escape, knowing death was inevitable. Some caves became charnel houses. Wounded men with no medical care, screaming in pain, dying slowly from infected wounds. Food and water running out. Disease spreading in the filth and confinement. The smell of decomposition from bodies that couldn't be removed. The psychological strain of waiting for the next attack, knowing that when it came, you would die. Some Japanese soldiers wrote final letters or diary entries that were later recovered. One soldier wrote, "We have no food, no water. The wounded are dying. The Americans are outside. Today or tomorrow they will come. I will die fighting. I hope my family knows I did my duty." Another wrote, "I can hear the Americans outside, calling for us to surrender. I want to surrender. I don't want to die. But if I try to surrender, the sergeant will kill me. So I wait." These writings reveal the human dimension of the tragedy. Not all Japanese soldiers were fanatical warriors eager to die for the emperor. Many were conscripts who wanted to survive but were trapped by a military culture that made surrender impossible. The survivors, the 7,400 Japanese soldiers who did surrender out of 77,000, described the psychological pressure. Officers would execute men who suggested surrender. Wounded men who couldn't fight were encouraged or forced to commit suicide to conserve resources. As conditions deteriorated, the line between defending the position and simply surviving until death became blurred. By the final weeks of the battle, many Japanese soldiers in caves were too weak from starvation and dehydration to fight effectively. American troops clearing caves found defenders too feeble to resist. But they also found soldiers who fought with desperate ferocity, knowing they would die but determined to kill Americans first. Explosive teams would follow the flamethrowers, placing satchel charges, canvas bags filled with explosives, typically TNT or composition C2, inside cave entrances and detonating them to cause collapses or kill defenders with blast overpressure. Engineers used bulldozers to seal cave entrances by pushing dirt and rocks over them, entombing anyone inside. In some cases, engineers pumped hundreds of gallons of gasoline into caves and ignited it with white phosphorus grenades or tracer bullets. The resulting fireballs incinerated everyone inside and consumed all oxygen. Chemical smoke was used to drive defenders out of some caves, though this was less common. The Japanese responded with their own tactics. They dug multiple entrances and exits to caves so troops could escape when one entrance was attacked. They positioned machine guns to cover cave entrances with interlocking fire, making it nearly impossible for Americans to approach. They rigged booby traps, grenades attached to tripwires, artillery shells wired as mines. They waited in caves until American troops passed, then emerged to attack from behind. At night, small groups infiltrated American lines to attack command posts, artillery positions, supply dumps. The horror wasn't limited to military casualties. Okinawan civilians were caught in the crossfire. An estimated 150,000 Okinawan civilians died during the battle, one-third of the island's pre-war population. Many had fled to caves seeking shelter. Some caves became civilian refuges. Hundreds or thousands of people, women, children, elderly, crowded into caves to escape the artillery bombardments and bombing. They lived in darkness and filth. Food ran out. Water was scarce. Disease spread. Some civilians died from starvation, dehydration, or illness while hiding in caves. Some were killed when American forces cleared caves, unable to distinguish between armed defenders and unarmed civilians in the chaos. Some died in forced mass suicides. The Japanese military had told civilians that American soldiers would torture and murder them if captured. Japanese soldiers in caves sometimes forced civilians to commit suicide using grenades rather than surrender. Other civilians killed themselves and their families voluntarily, believing death was preferable to capture. Two caves near Yomitan village illustrate the tragedy. Chibikairigama, 140 villagers evacuated to this cave as American forces approached. Of those, 83 died in a mass suicide. Mothers killed their children. Families died together. The cave became a tomb. Less than a mile away, Shimokugama sheltered approximately 1,000 villagers. Two Okinawans in this cave had spent time in Hawaii before the war and spoke English. They told the others that Americans didn't kill civilians. When American soldiers arrived and called for surrender, these two men convinced the villagers to come out. All 1,000 survived. Chibikairigama became known as Sad Cave. Shimokugama became known as Happy Cave, though as one local guide noted, there was nothing happy about either cave. The difference between survival and death was information. Knowledge that Americans took prisoners. Trust in that knowledge. The absence of that knowledge meant death for thousands. The battle ground on for 3 months. The Shuri Line fell on May 29th after weeks of fighting. The Japanese withdrew to their final defensive positions on the Quinn Peninsula at the southern tip of Okinawa. The Americans pursued. The final battles at Kanishi Ridge, Hill 89, Hill 95, were as brutal as any in the campaign. On June 18th, Lieutenant General Buckner, commander of the U.S. 10th Army, was killed by Japanese artillery while visiting a forward observation post. 3 days before the battle ended, the commanding general was killed. Lieutenant General Ushijima and Lieutenant General Cho committed ritual suicide on June 22nd in a cave at Mabuni, the southernmost point of Okinawa. The battle was over. The butcher's bill was staggering. American casualties: 12,520 killed, 38,916 wounded. U.S. Navy casualties were even worse due to kamikaze attacks. 4,907 sailors killed, 4,824 wounded, 36 ships sunk, 368 damaged. Japanese casualties. Approximately 77,000 military dead. Only 7,400 Japanese soldiers surrendered, a 10% survival rate. The rest died in the caves. Okinawan civilian casualties. Approximately 150,000 dead, one-third of the pre-war population. Historians consider it the bloodiest battle of the Pacific War. The casualty rate per day exceeded any other Pacific campaign. And when the fighting stopped, the caves remained, filled with the dead. For years after the battle, volunteers and recovery teams searched caves for remains. The American Graves Registration Service conducted systematic searches from 1945 through the early 1950s, recovering American bodies for repatriation and burial. They found thousands of sets of remains, but they couldn't find everyone. Some caves had collapsed completely. Some were hidden by jungle growth. Some were simply never found. In 1951, investigators returned to the cave where PFC John Quinn had disappeared on June 29, 1945. They recovered 19 sets of remains. All were determined to be Japanese soldiers based on uniforms, equipment, and forensic analysis. Quinn was declared non-recoverable, his body lost forever. Or so it seemed. Then in 1993, Second Lieutenant Kerry J. Quinn, a Marine stationed at Camp Butler, Okinawa, no relation to John B. Quinn, Jr., was hiking near an old cave when he found a dog tag on the ground. It read, PFC John B. Quinn, Jr. He turned it over to authorities. Further investigation confirmed the location matched the cave where Quinn had disappeared 48 years earlier. But recovery efforts stalled. The cave entrance was sealed, the site was unstable, and resources weren't available for excavation. Decades passed. Then in 2022, Kuentai-USA, a volunteer organization founded to recover remains of missing American servicemen, partnered with Japanese volunteers to excavate the cave. Over 2 weeks in April and July 2022, more than 230 volunteers participated. They dug through collapsed ceiling material, excavating down to the original tiled floor 1 meter below the surface. They found human bones, including large leg bones that may have been American based on size, teeth, American coins, watches, morphine vials and glass ampoules, still sealed after 77 years. Japanese rice bowls, intact. Japanese Hanko personal seals bearing the names Ueda, Mitsushima, and Masuda. Bullets, grenades, other military artifacts. If this story is resonating with you, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing detailed historical content like this. The bones recovered from Quinn's cave are currently stored at the Okinawa Prefectural Peace Memorial Museum, pending DNA analysis. If they are confirmed to be Quinn's remains, or those of PFC John Hartman, the other Marine killed in the cave, they can finally be returned to their families for burial. But Quinn's cave is just one of hundreds, perhaps thousands, of caves on Okinawa that still contain human remains. The recovery effort continues to this day. Volunteer organizations search caves throughout Okinawa. The Okinawa Lime Cave Association, founded by Haizaburo Yamauchi in the 1960s, has spent decades exploring caves and recovering remains. Yamauchi, now in his 70s, has personally recovered remains from hundreds of caves. He describes entering caves in the late 1960s where remains were still scattered on the surface. So many that he rode on a 2-ton truck, fully loaded with human remains while holding hand grenades on the truck bed to make sure they wouldn't detonate. Takamatsu Gushikin, an Okinawan civilian who calls himself a gamahuya, bone digger, in the Okinawan language, has dedicated his life to searching caves. He enters caves buried in jungle, shines his headlamp across the floor, and gently sifts through dirt and gravel until bones emerge. Skull fragments, leg bones, teeth. Sometimes the bones are those of infants, sometimes adults, sometimes Japanese soldiers, sometimes Okinawan civilians. He carefully places each bone in a ceramic rice bowl, records details in a small red notebook, approximate age of victim, likely cause of death, location within cave, and delivers the remains to the Okinawa Prefectural Peace Memorial Foundation mortuary. The mortuary currently stores approximately 1,400 sets of remains found in recent decades. These await DNA testing for potential identification and return to families. But DNA identification is painfully slow. From 2003, when Japan began DNA matching, through 2025, only 1,280 sets of Japanese war dead have been identified, including just 6 on Okinawa. The process requires DNA samples from living relatives, but many families don't have surviving relatives after 80 years. Teeth and intact bones are required for testing, but many remains are fragmentary. Records were lost or destroyed during the war, making positive identification nearly impossible. The types of artifacts found in caves vary depending on the cave's wartime use. Military caves, used as fighting positions, command posts, or barracks, contain weapons, ammunition, helmets, canteens, ration containers, personal items like diaries and photographs. Medical caves, used as field hospitals, contain medicine bottles and ampoules, surgical instruments, stretchers, bandages. Some caves still have intact morphine in sealed glass ampoules 77 years later. Others have surgical saws, scalpels, and forceps rusted but recognizable. Civilian caves contain different artifacts: cooking pots, rice bowls, children's toys, clothing remnants, family photographs protected in metal containers, personal items that tell stories of ordinary people caught in extraordinary circumstances. Some caves have messages scratched or painted on walls. Japanese soldiers writing final messages to families they knew they'd never see again. Okinawan civilians leaving records of who was in the cave, hoping someone would find them and tell their stories. American graffiti from Marines who cleared caves, names, units, dates, marking their presence during the battle. Some caves have evidence of the violence that occurred inside. Bullet impacts on walls, grenade blast patterns, scorch marks from flamethrowers, bloodstains still visible on rock surfaces. The physical evidence of how people died. Other caves show evidence of long-term occupation. Carved sleeping platforms, ventilation shafts dug to provide air circulation, water collection systems, makeshift latrines, evidence that people lived in these caves for weeks or months before dying. The most disturbing discoveries are the civilian mass suicide sites, caves where entire families died together, mothers with infants, children clutching toys, elderly grandparents, all dead from grenades, poison, or suffocation. Archaeologists and recovery teams approach these sites with reverence. They're not just excavating bones. They're uncovering a tragedy. Every bone represents a person who died terrified, believing they had no choice. The scale of death in some caves is difficult to comprehend. One recovery volunteer, Katsuhiko Kuniyashi, has spent 40 years searching caves. He's personally recovered 2,200 sets of remains from approximately 500 caves. In one cave alone, he found 35 sets of remains. These aren't isolated incidents. Hundreds of caves contained multiple bodies. Some contained dozens. The total number of dead in Okinawa's caves, military and civilian combined, likely exceeds 50,000. Many have been recovered. Many remain undiscovered. Modern discoveries continue. In February 2025, volunteers found skull fragments and other bones in a cave in Itoman. In March 2025, a volunteer searching a cave in Nanjo recovered bones believed to be from an Imperial Japanese soldier, along with unexploded ordnance. The Japan Ground Self-Defense Forces explosive ordnance disposal teams are called regularly to handle grenades, artillery shells, and other munitions found in caves. Still dangerous after 80 years. Some caves remain too dangerous to enter. Unstable ceilings that could collapse. Unexploded ordnance that could detonate if disturbed. Toxic atmospheres from decomposition or chemical residues. Unknown cave systems that haven't been mapped. The question the title poses, what did Marines find inside? Has multiple answers depending on which caves and when. During the battle in 1945, Marines clearing caves found enemy soldiers, sometimes surrendering, more often fighting to the death. Civilians, terrified, often believing they would be killed if captured. Bodies, fresh casualties and older remains, weapons caches, rifles, machine guns, grenades, ammunition stockpiles, medical supplies and field hospitals, command centers with maps, radios, and documents, food stores, rice, canned goods, sake. Personal effects, letters from home, family. Photographs, diaries, defensive positions, machine gun nests, artillery pieces, ammunition ready for use, booby traps, grenades rigged to detonate when caves were entered, evidence of atrocities, including mass civilian suicides forced by Japanese soldiers. In the decades since the battle, recovery teams found skeletal remains, thousands of sets from Japanese soldiers, Okinawan civilians, American servicemen, and Korean forced laborers. Artifacts providing identification clues, dog tags, military insignia, personal seals, identification papers, weapons and munitions, still dangerous after decades, medical supplies, morphine ampoules, surgical instruments, medicine bottles, personal items, photographs, letters, diaries, cooking utensils, children's toys, evidence of how people died, bullet impacts, grenade fragments, signs of fire or suffocation, messages left behind, graffiti, carved inscriptions, written notes, unexpected discoveries, including ancient archaeological remains predating World War II by thousands of years. Some caves have yielded archaeological discoveries completely unrelated to the war. Okinawa's caves were used by humans for thousands of years before 1945. In 2007, the Okinawa Limestone Cave Association discovered the Shiraho Sayonetabaru cave ruins. Excavation revealed human remains dating to 20,000 to 24,000 years ago, some of the oldest human remains ever found in Japan. One skeleton was found in a burial position, face up with knees folded toward the chest and hands near the face, suggesting intentional burial. This was confirmed as Japan's first Paleolithic burial site. In 2021, the Yabuchi caves yielded skull fragments dating to 9,000 to 10,000 years ago, representing the oldest Keizukai-era remains ever discovered in Okinawa. These discoveries illustrate that Okinawa's caves hold multiple layers of history: ancient human occupation, wartime tragedy, modern recovery efforts. Each layer tells part of the island's story. The most poignant finds are those that connect families across generations. In 2000, 3 African-American Marines who had been killed in July 1945 were finally recovered from a cave near Katsuyama. Their remains had been hidden for 55 years, a village secret. When recovered, identified, and repatriated, they were buried together at Arlington National Cemetery in October 2000. Their families finally had closure. This is the goal of ongoing recovery efforts, not just to find bones, but to return lost sons, brothers, fathers, and husbands to families who have waited 80 years for answers. The scale of the cave network on Okinawa is almost incomprehensible. The Japanese 32nd Army constructed or improved thousands of cave positions. The former Japanese Navy underground headquarters, now a museum, shows what these complexes looked like. Located approximately 20 meters underground, it contains 450 meters of tunnel and rooms. During the battle, it housed approximately 4,000 sailors. The operations room, communications room, medical station, and living quarters are preserved. The commanding officer's room is scarred with holes from the hand grenade he used to commit suicide on June 13, 1945. Visitors can walk through the tunnels today, seeing how defenders lived and died. But the Navy underground headquarters was just one complex. Every defensive line had dozens or hundreds of positions. The Shuri Line, the main defensive position, had cave complexes so extensive that entire battalions could shelter underground. Multiple levels, interconnected tunnels extending for miles, gun ports at different elevations providing overlapping fields of fire, underground hospitals treating thousands of wounded, ammunition depots with thousands of shells, water storage cisterns, living quarters with bunks, command posts with radios and telephone lines. These were military installations comparable to modern underground bunkers, except carved by hand from limestone using primitive tools. Tens of thousands of laborers spent months excavating these positions. Many of the laborers, Okinawans and Koreans, died during construction from cave-ins, accidents, or Allied bombing. Their remains are also in the caves. American forces developed doctrine for cave warfare during Okinawa. The tactics they used: combined arms coordination, flamethrowers, explosives, bulldozers, became standard practice. Training manuals were written based on Okinawa lessons. When American troops fought in Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan in tunnels and caves, they used tactics developed on Okinawa. The psychological toll on American troops who cleared caves was severe. Many developed what today would be diagnosed as PTSD, combat stress reaction, shell shock in earlier terminology. The close-quarters nature of cave fighting, the smell of death, the moral ambiguity of killing enemies who might be surrendering or civilians who appeared threatening, the constant danger of booby traps, all contributed to psychological trauma. One veteran, Herman Buffington of the 96th Infantry Division, wrote years later, "This may be a shocking statement, but at one time in my life, I was a hardened killer. I probably killed more human beings on Okinawa in 3 months than have been murdered in Jackson County, Georgia, where I live, in the past 10 or 15 years. I am not proud of this, but I do know it was a necessary part of my job." Another veteran described the cave fighting as reducing soldiers to hardened killers, who did not consider the enemy as a person. This dehumanization was necessary for survival but carried lifelong psychological costs. For Okinawans, the caves hold different meanings. They're sites of tragedy where family members died, sacred places that shouldn't be disturbed, historical sites that must be preserved to educate future generations. Many caves have memorial markers, small shrines with offerings of flowers, incense, sake, food. Families visit caves where relatives died, praying for the spirits of the dead. Some caves are maintained as historical sites with guided tours to educate visitors about the battle. Others are sealed and marked as mass graves, considered too sacred to disturb. The Okinawan perspective on the caves is shaped by complex feelings about the battle. Many Okinawans blame both the Japanese military and American forces for the civilian deaths. The Japanese military used civilians as human shields, forced them into mass suicides, and prioritized military objectives over civilian safety. American forces, despite attempts to minimize civilian casualties, killed thousands with artillery, bombing, and cave-clearing operations that didn't distinguish between armed combatants and unarmed civilians. The caves are reminders of this tragedy. Walking into a cave where civilians died in mass suicide is a profound experience. The darkness, the silence, the knowledge that here, in this exact spot, families died together in terror. It's impossible not to imagine the fear they felt, the desperation, the belief that death was their only option. This isn't ancient history. People alive today are children or grandchildren of those who died in the caves. The trauma echoes across generations. The ongoing military presence on Okinawa adds another layer of complexity. Today, Okinawa hosts over half of the approximately 50,000 American troops stationed in Japan. Many Okinawans view this presence with mixed feelings. Some see it as necessary security against potential threats from China and North Korea. Others see it as a continuation of wartime occupation. The noise, pollution, accidents, and crimes associated with military bases are constant irritants. The Japanese government's current military buildup on Okinawa, sending more Japanese self-defense force troops and weapons to the island and outer islands, raises concerns among Okinawans who remember the last time their island became a battlefield. Volunteer bone diggers like Takamatsu Gushiken explicitly connect their work to anti-war advocacy. Gushiken has stated, "The best way to honor the war dead is never to allow another war. I'm worried about Okinawa's situation now. I'm afraid there is a growing risk that Okinawa may become a battlefield again for these volunteers." Recovering bones from caves isn't just about bringing closure to families. It's about bearing witness to the horror of war and warning future generations. Every skull fragment is evidence. Every bone tells a story. The story is, war destroys everyone it touches. Military, civilian, victor vanquished. Everyone loses. So was there an Okinawa cave system sealed for exactly 80 years? No single cave fits that description perfectly. but dozens or hundreds of caves were sealed, collapsed, or abandoned during the battle in 1945 and remained undiscovered or inaccessible for decades, many approaching 80 years undisturbed. What did Marines find inside during the battle? Enemy soldiers, civilians, bodies, weapons. The horror of war in its most concentrated form. What have recovery teams found in the decades since? More bodies, thousands of sets of remains, artifacts that tell stories of those who died, evidence of tragedy on a massive scale, and a warning to future generations about the cost of war. The title captures a truth even if the specific claim is imprecise. Okinawa's caves hold secrets that are still being revealed 80 years after the battle. Every discovery adds another piece to the historical record. Every recovered remain brings closure to a family. Every volunteer who enters a cave to search for bones honors the dead by refusing to let them be forgotten. The caves of Okinawa are more than historical sites. They're mass graves, sacred spaces, classrooms teaching lessons about war's horror, memorials to those who died, and reminders that the Battle of Okinawa, while it ended on June 22, 1945, continues to shape lives today. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.